Something else that often comes up here, particularly when the smoking example is used to illustrate that you don't necessarily need a randomized controlled trial to influence public health recommendations and sort of infer causality. And I have another quote here that I'm going to read out because I think this summarizes it nicely. It's from Peter Attia, who is an MD. I think he does great work online. But he's a little bit critical of observational epidemiology, particularly in the nutrition science field. I'm not sure if it's a fair statement or not. I'll read it out. The sooner we can all move away from using observational epidemiology like this, and he was referring to a study looking at red meat, as a palette to paint our preconceptions with, the better. Yes, observational epidemiology helped determine that cigarette smoking is a cause of lung cancer, for example, contaminated water and cholera, scrotal cancer and chimney sweeps. I can assure you that those studies were not reporting associated relative risk ratios less than 2 and absolute risk increases of less than 0.2%. This is something I've seen quite a bit where people will disregard the findings based on the effect size being less than 2. Is that something that you've come across?
Yes, but I think that's the world we live in, that given that most of the diseases that we study, like cancer and cardiovascular disease and diabetes, are the result of many different factors, many different causal factors coming together. There's no single cause like cholera and contaminated water, the cholera organism living in the water. That most of the things, the big issues, again, are much more complex. And it means that any one factor may contribute a modest part of the total. But when you add up these modest parts, like for heart disease, it's the number one cause of death. And so if you insist on having a relative risk of 2 or more, you're just not going to understand the causation and certainly the prevention of the diseases. So the reality is that the realistic relative risks that we would be looking for are often in the range of 1.2 or 1.3. But when you're looking at something that's important, as important as coronary heart disease or common breast cancer, common cancers, a 20% increase would be important, like for mammographic screening, for example, that reduces risk by about 20 or 25%, and we devote a lot of energy and resources to that. So we're and almost all the cancer treatments have effects that are 10%, 20%. Those are the winner treatments. So that those kinds of differences are considered very important when we're looking at common outcomes. And so the real issue is those are the kinds of issues that we want. Those are the questions that we're looking for. What are the best ways to get at knowledge, to understanding causation? And so again, there's no single perfect study, and one will almost certainly never do a randomized trial to look at the effect of red meat on coronary heart disease or many cancers. So that's why you have to create the best designed studies that we can, and then use multiple kinds of evidence.
Yeah, I do think there is a bit of an inconsistency in some people in the way that they take this angle that relative risk under 2 are not meaningful. If you take that position, you kind of also have to take the position that trans fats are not increasing risk of coronary heart disease, because I believe most of those studies, including yours, the relative risk for that relationship was under 2.
Right. Yes, and so many important things that we devote lots of resources to try to reduce risk by 20%, which would correspond to a relative risk of 1.2 or 1.3. So that we do in general consider those kinds of effects very important.